Welcome everyone to this workshop. I'm glad to see you all. I would like to begin first with an opening prayer. Holy One, we thank you for this day and for this time together and for the modern technology, wonderful wizard of Zoom. Bless our time together. May it be fruitful for everyone. We ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen. So, if we had the luxury of all kinds of time, I would want to know where you're all from, but that would take up half of the workshop time. So just raise your hand if you are a caregiver or have been a caregiver. Oh, I can't tell because most of you aren't visual. Well, anyhow. Caregiving is a hard job, no matter what the disease is. But caregiving for somebody with Alzheimer's or mental memory impairment is especially difficult. And Alzheimer's falls under the umbrella of dementia, and it covers other kinds of like Lewy body disease and frontal lobal and different parts of mental impairment like Alzheimer's. But I'm going to be talking more generally about caregiving for people with mental impairment. But if you're caregiving for somebody with another long-term or life-threatening disease, caregiving is just as difficult, and there are many ways to deal with what goes on with it. So whenever I'm talking to caregivers, I always stress on how important it is that you take care of yourselves first. Now that may sound selfish, but it's not. If you fly on an airplane, you know that the flight attendant comes on and says, if the oxygen mask comes down, put it on you first, and then reach over and help the person beside you. You can't pour from an empty cup. If you aren't taking care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of your loved one. So that's my nag, and I'm always on caregivers about that. So you might be familiar with the author Lisa Genova. She wrote the book Still Alice, which became an award-winning movie that Julia Moore won Best Actress for. Lisa writes a lot of novels from her neuroscientist background. However, she has recently written a nonfiction called Remember. And it's not necessarily about a disease, it's about how we remember. But in the book, there's one chapter that resonated deeply with me as a caregiver, when she talks about stress and the toll it takes on us. The more stress we have in our lives, the more likely or more prone we are to developing memory issues or other health issues. This is what she says: chronic stress is bad for your memory. Now, in the resources that John has posted that I submitted, there's a very simple 3-sentence, I think, stress test that you can take to see what kind of stress you're dealing with. But the big question is, how do we minimize stress in our lives, especially when we're caring for a loved one? Obviously, we can't remove every bit of stress from our lives, but we can learn how to manage it. Let me tell you a little story. Has nothing to do with Alzheimer's, but it has to do with stress and weaving. I'm a weaver. So if any of you know anything about weaving, you put threads on a warp. They're the ones that go back and forth. I mean, this way. And if those threads are too tight, they're going to break and go pop, and you've got nothing left to work with. And if they're too loose, you can't get the shuttle through the warp threads. So there's nothing there either. So you have to find the right amount of stress in your lives that will help you get through your daily life with the caregiving for somebody. Let's see, what do I have here? So there are the ways to manage stress and how it influences your body: mindfulness, yoga, a healthy diet, gratitude, compassion, writing, I highly recommend any and all of those activities, especially the writing part. I don't know if you're familiar with the writer Anna Quinlan. She writes a lot of novels too, but she has a new book out, and it's a nonfiction. It's called Write for Life, where she talks about the importance of writing or journaling. And you don't have to be aspiring to be a writer, but just to write down what's happening in your daily life. It helps to spend a few minutes every day getting it out of your system. In the audience the night I heard her speak was a woman who asked a question. She said, I want to write, but I never can find the time to sit down and write. And her answer was, if you had a lover, you would find 15 minutes every day to meet that lover in the back stairway or someplace else. So my advice to you is find those 15 minutes every day to be with your lover, who just happens to be you, to take care of yourself. Find 15 minutes every day just to let go of whatever it is that's, disconnect from life for a few minutes and let the stress go. And when you write those things down on a piece of paper, after you're done with it, you can just tear it up and throw it away. You've gotten rid of it. That bad day is gone, and you can go ahead with another day or another hour of the caregiving. Any of these practices that I've talked about, mindfulness, yoga, music, walking, they'll help reduce your blood pressure and anxiety and inflammation and real or perceived stress. Another thing is sleep. Sleep is vital. It is essential. And maybe over the years, you've heard the late Barbara Harris talk about the 10 commandments. She always says they're commandments, they're not the 10 suggestions. So my commandment to each of you is take care of yourself and be sure to get enough sleep. That's important. Sleep deprivation can lead to memory disease. So during my active years of caregiving for my husband, Donald, my daily mantra was a paraphrase from a chapter in the book of Ephesians, that God is doing infinitely more than we can hope for or imagine. So I look for the infinitely more every day in my life. And I've shortened it to I am. I'm looking for my daily I am to get through and give thanks to God for what God is doing for me, and know that God is walking with me through this journey. Several years ago, I read a lot. So now I'm going to tell you about the author Ann Patchett. No, I already told you about her. She's the one that wanted to go meet the lover. But that's you. God created you, God is with you, and God loves you. So find that time every day to be mindful of yourself. I'm going to switch from caregiving for a few minutes and talk a little bit about Alzheimer's disease with some facts and figures, and then I'll go back to caregiving. Alzheimer's disease is a neurodegenerative disease that affects the cognitive thinking and problem solving of patients, and is caused by the degeneration and death of brain cells. Amyloid plaques and tangles get all mixed up with each other in the brain. Alzheimer's disease is the 6th leading cause of death in the country. The latest figures are from 2020, show that there are 6.3 million people in this country who have been diagnosed with this disease. There are 500,000 of them in Florida and 400,000 in Texas. There are, this is outstanding, 15.3 billion hours of unpaid care devoted to people with Alzheimer's disease. 15.3 billion hours. And that's done by people like you and me who are caring for a loved one at home, not for those who are in a facility. So you can just imagine how many people there are in our country right now in that position, being a caregiver to a loved one. Alzheimer's is a terrible disease. It's costly in terms of money and as well as the loss of the patient's mind. And if you can afford care and have long-term health insurance, that's fantastic. But that's not always possible or feasible for most people because it is expensive. I was lucky enough to have long-term insurance, so I had enough money to pay for Donald's care without having to apply for Medicaid. But some people have to do that. Life expectancy generally of a patient with Alzheimer's is 3 to 11 years. And for us, it was 2 years of diagnosis and 9 years of his actual disease. I cared for him for 6 years at home, and then he spent the last 3 years of his life in a care facility, which was the hardest thing in my life to do, to place him, but it was absolutely necessary. The day he put a plastic bag of trash and a plastic bag of garbage in the wood stove that had a lovely fire going, I knew it wasn't safe for either one of us. And I had signs all around in the wood stove, barricaded so he couldn't get to it, but he did anyhow. They're generally considered to be 7 stages in Alzheimer's. The first one, the initial stage, is asymptomatic, when changes in the brain have already begun to happen, but they're probably not very noticeable. The next stage is characterized by minor memory issues. And then cognitive issues, such as trouble remembering the right words, begins to happen. And then people experience significant memory difficulties, like forgetting the person they're married to or the country where they live. The 6th stage, patients have decreased independence and paranoia and delusions. 7 is severe cognitive decline and personality changes. And the last one is lack of physical control of the body as the body begins to slow down and the mind struggles to communicate. I'm sad to say that my husband experienced all of those symptoms. The worst was the personality changes at the very end of his life, which were horrible to live through, and not everybody experiences that. So don't think that anybody that you're caring for is going to become violent. That doesn't happen to everybody, fortunately. Some other interesting facts about Alzheimer's. The normal brain shrinks to about 1/3 of its standard size as it begins to atrophy. There are 500,000 deaths from Alzheimer's in this country alone every year. Alzheimer's disease patients are more likely to die if they have contracted COVID than other COVID patients. And you're not going to like this one, but 2/3 of the people that get Alzheimer's are women. And there were definitely more women than men in the care facility where my husband lived. Type 2 diabetes can also be a contributing factor to Alzheimer's. However, some of the medications used to treat type 2 diabetes can have a positive effect on an Alzheimer's patient. As of today, sadly, there are no positive, clearly treatable medications. Nothing has been developed yet. They're working on it. They think they've got something, and then it doesn't work, and there's no vaccine to prevent it. So we just keep hoping and praying that someday the medical scientists will find a medication or a vaccine that will cure or prevent Alzheimer's. And, you know, there's so much about the brain that we just don't understand, that I'm glad that there are people working on it all the time. Now, the great German philosopher and theologian Goethe had this to say, and I love this quote of his: "Everyone should hear a little music, read a little poetry, and see a fine picture every day, in order that the worldly care imparted in the human soul. So it's a good piece of advice for caregivers, for anyone, but especially for caregivers. Listen to a little music every day. Just turn on your radio or wherever you get your music. Read a little poetry. It can be the Book of Psalms. They're beautiful poems. And see a fine picture. Maybe it's as simple as looking out your window at nature. As I look out the window in front of me, I'm surrounded by pine trees. So you can do these things, music, beauty, picture, poetry, very simply, but it certainly imparts the beauty of this world that God gives us and helps fill our soul. Now, these three things have to do with the arts, and the arts are very important to everyone, but especially to memory impaired people. They're the last senses that we lose, and music is the absolute last sense that we lose. So I encourage you as a caregiver to be sure that you keep mindful of arts and the need for them to be present in the life of the person you're caring for. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It can be, as I say, music on the radio or your wherever you get your music from. And as I say, just looking out the window at God's beautiful creation or reading the Book of Psalms. Music, dance, art, all those things are very important. During Donald's disease, I used to take him to the Currier Museum of Art in Manchester, New Hampshire, to a memory care activity. It was once a month for a couple of hours. And the first thing we would do was a little social time, and then look at pictures on a screen that the staff had prepared. And they would ask people, what do you see in this picture? What do you think is happening? Why are they dressed that way? And one day, the focus was on architecture and building. My husband was a retired building contractor. And the first picture up on the screen was the Colosseum in Rome. And his comment was, "Oh, that won't pass OSHA." And everybody burst out laughing. What he saw connected in his brain was something he knew and understood, because it connected him to his building. And clearly the Colosseum needed a lot of help to meet today's building standards. So if you can't find that kind of an activity, perhaps just find some books with things in it that appeal to your loved one and sit and go through them. I used to take pictures, books of architecture, and we'd go through them and talk about what we were seeing. So that's important to for you and for the caregiver, because you can derive pleasure also from going to a memory cafe at a museum. And I know that there are other museums around the country that were doing this before COVID, and some of them still may be. I know the one in Manchester had to stop during COVID. Another easy thing for you as a caregiver, see if your local library has a video called Alive Inside. It was done by a social worker who went into a nursing home, and he put earphones on a patient and an iPod around their neck with their favorite genre of music downloaded. And when these patients listened to their favorite music, they came alive. There was one man in the video who hadn't talked for months. And as soon as he heard his favorite music, he began to talk. And there was another woman who loved to dance, and she'd been pretty much in her chair. She'd heard her favorite music. She got up and began to dance around the room. So those are simple little things that can help the person you're caring for and make life, I hope, a little easier and more pleasant for you, the caregiver. One of my favorite stress busters for me in terms of music was listening to Camille Saint-Saëns' Third Symphony, which is known as the Organ Symphony. I would lie down on the floor and stretch my arms out and wait for the third movement, when those thundering organ chords would come on, and I could feel the vibrations rumble through my body. And it was just this wonderful sense of relief, and the stress just left. So these are just little tips of things that may help you find ways to make your day of caregiving a little easier. And you need to find those 15 minutes and see what you can do to help yourself. I also go to concerts at St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire, and I found just the right place in the back row of the chapel seating, across from each other, where I can sit with my back up against the wooden chair. And when the organ plays, again, those vibrations just go through my body and just bring peace. So that's another little tip. Another piece of music tip. My last meaningful visit with Donald in the nursing home, we sat and watched on television an orchestra playing Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, the Pastoral. Now, if you're familiar with it, it begins with lovely pastoral music, and then there's a big storm, and then it ends with more pastoral music. So we had a great time watching that, and Donald was making fun at times. He had a wonderful sense of humor, so a couple of times he would comment on the bald-headed flute player or something like that. But I had to leave that meeting and that visit and go to a meeting. At the same time, I was chair of the local school board, and I had to meet with the superintendent of schools to deal with a very thorny issue to be prepared for the board meeting the following week. My vice chair had just committed suicide, and what were we going to do? And while I'm at this meeting with the superintendent, the phone rang, and it was the nursing home calling to say that Donald had just gone off the rails, and they put him in an ambulance and sent him to the hospital. And I thought, oh my goodness, what else can go wrong? So I dashed away from my meeting and drove 25 miles, but I stayed within the speed limit. And when I got to the hospital, there are 4 burly, big, muscular security guards holding my husband down. As I said, this happened at the end of his life, not during any of the 9 years leading up to this, when he was just totally out of control. And so he ended up in hospice house for a week before he died. So that was pretty traumatic, and it doesn't happen to everyone, but I share that with you to prepare you that these things can happen to you as a caregiver. So for several months after he died, whenever I heard Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, I would just collapse. One day I was driving, and I had to pull over to the side of the road because I was crying so hard. Now, 3 years later, I can listen to it and know it's sort of a metaphor for my life. There's the lovely pastoral, peaceful beginning of the symphony, which was our marriage. And then there's this big storm, and then the calm after the storm. So that's one way I have dealt with all of this. You can tell I'm a music lover, classical music, but I do listen to other kinds. So I've been stressing the importance of arts. So I just want you to know that how important that is. And also self-care. How do you cram that into your life? It took me a while to come up with a workable plan. I hired an agency that they sent me an aide on Mondays for 5 hours. Now, my name is Marjorie, so I called it Marjorie's Monday. And everyone knew that that was my time for me. I wouldn't have any appointments. I wouldn't do grocery shopping. I didn't house clean. I just went off by myself to do whatever I needed. Some days I would go and sit by a river or a lake. Other days, there are 2 orchards near me. I could go and sit, and they're up and look out at the mountains in New Hampshire. And mountains and water both resonate deeply with me. So that would help bring peace to me and to my body. I also arranged for a respite time by putting Donald in a home where he ended up living, and for a couple of days. And I just went off to a bed and breakfast in Kennebunkport, which was in Maine, which is one of the places that I like to go. And the day I did this, and I walked out of the air-conditioned home into a 90-degree humid day, I just felt the stress just wash away from me. My shoulders slumped, and it was unbelievable how stressed less I felt, and how much I knew I needed this time away. So maybe you can't find 3 days to go away, but you sure can find 15 minutes every day to set aside and be you. Find what you need, and you know yourself best, so you know what you need to care for yourself. You also know your loved one best, and so you know what kind of activities will help them connect their mind to something in their life, like the Coliseum for a building contractor. I also encourage you to look for a support group in your area. And if there isn't one locally, you could start one. A friend of mine at church and I, whose husband was in about the same stage as mine, started a support group together. And we met twice a month for 2 hours at a time. And we just talked about what life was like for us. And you know, something that you're experiencing you might think it's the worst thing in the world that happened. But you know, when you share it with somebody else who's gone through the same thing, you can all laugh about it. As awful as it is, if you're in company together, you can laugh about some of these things. And what this friend of mine and I did in the early stages of our husband's disease, for our own sanity, we created Fridays at 4, and maybe not every Friday, but frequently, we would leave our husbands. We could leave them for about an hour, and we would go to a nearby restaurant and have a glass of red wine and some fried onion rings. And we could make believe that we were normal women without a care in the world. And then one day I was typing up all of this, and I made a Freudian typo. And instead of fried onion rings, I called them friend onion rings. So find a friend that you can share some of this stuff with, laugh, be together. You don't have to go and have onion rings and red wine. It might be just a walk around the block or a cup of coffee, but do it for yourself. It's important. And another thing that's very helpful is to make a memory book. There's no set pattern to how to make a memory book, but take your loved one's life and put it into a little notebook. And if it's all possible, have them work with you to put it together. Talk about their early life, pictures, what it was like to go where they went to school, so that there's something tangible that person can look at. And maybe looking at a picture when he or she was 6 years old and he's playing Frisbee with a friend will trigger something happy and positive that will connect that person and make your visit more pleasant. So if at all possible, have the person help you do it. But if not, do it yourself. As I say, you know that person best. And if they end up going into a care facility, it's a wonderful tool for the staff, because they can go through it and get to know your loved one before they have to care for that person, and have things that they can say that will connect something with the long-term memories that are hardwired into their brain. So that's another little tip. Um, Alzheimer's patients begin to lose their peripheral vision as the disease progresses, so beware of that. My husband was prone to missing the chair and he'd end up on the floor. And his standard comment was, the chair won. So just be aware that peripheral vision can go. And another helpful hint, it takes an Alzheimer's person a minimum of 30 seconds to process and understand what you have said to them, whether it's just a statement or a question. So give them the luxury of time. 30 seconds might seem like an eternity to you while you're waiting, or it might just go zip, but they need that time to process what's happening, why you're asking them something or telling them something. What's next on my papers here? Oh, we also went through a period of hallucinations when he was at home. There was often a choir that would come to the house, according to him. Of course, there was no choir in the house. And I would ask them, well, what are they singing? How many are there? Where are they? Well, just come and see them, he would say to me. So for my own sanity, instead of arguing with him and saying, don't be silly, there's no choir in the house, I made up fictional characters and gave them names. There was Clem, Claude, Clyde, Clara, Chloe, and Charlotte. And so when he would start with the choir, I would just think, oh, I wonder which one of these people is singing now. So I dealt with a lot of my own humor to get through some of these difficult situations. And don't argue with a person that has Alzheimer's. If they say it's raining out and it's a beautiful, shiny day, just agree with them. Go along with it. Donald often asked me when I can go home. When am I going home? And my standard answer, recommended by the staff, was, I'm working on it. That would satisfy him. So you don't want to necessarily lie to a person, but you make up little fiblets. That's what we call these little things in the world of Alzheimer's. Donald often asked me if I had seen his sister Kathleen. Now, she's been dead for about 30 years. And so I would say, no, I haven't seen her lately, but I know she's okay. Well, where is she? Well, she's in Watertown. That's where they lived. And all of that was true. Only I didn't tell him that Watertown is where his sister was buried. So I was telling him the truth, but not the whole truth, but enough to satisfy him. So you have to be a little creative and come up with little fiblets on what to do, how to cope with what's happening. So I've talked about the memory book. Oh, you need to be a strong advocate for your loved one, not just for yourself and your own self. It may say on the patient's chart that the person has Alzheimer's, but people don't always understand, pay attention to that. Because the person may have come in with some other reason, pneumonia, or maybe they fell and broke a leg or something. And Alzheimer's patients can get very agitated in a strange setting. Ask them to dim the lights in the little triage room. And unless they're being treated for a heart attack, ask them if they could loosen the perpetual blood pressure cuff that's right on their upper arm, because that can upset them. So just advocate constantly that this person is here because of this, but they also have Alzheimer's and they might not understand what you're asking them to do. And so some of these things I learned the hard way. So I'm glad to share them with other people. And don't be afraid to ask for help. There's nothing wrong with asking people to help you as a caregiver. And if you're not a caregiver and you have a friend who's a caregiver, don't hesitate to ask, what can I do to help you? Maybe as simple as stopping by someday with a pot of coffee and a couple of scones, and make that person just sit down and spend 10 minutes with you. The dishes can wait, the laundry can wait, all the necessary things around the house can wait 10 minutes or a half an hour, so that you are taking some time to take care of yourself. It's really important. If someone you know is going grocery shopping and you need a few things, ask them if they could please do this for you. And most people will be more than happy to help you out. And as I say, there's no shame in asking for help. Now, another thing that I have found is good for both the caregiver and the care receiver: adult coloring. It's fashionable these days. So I encouraged you. I have a book of mandalas and a bunch of colored crayons, and I often sit, even now, and just take some time to pick out different color schemes and draw or color. And if I don't feel like staying inside the lines, I don't. But who cares? It's part of my self-care. So find something that will help you and help the other person too, if that's something that appeals to you. But as I've watched people in the home where Donald was, when coloring was the activity for the morning, and they would just lose themselves in what they were doing. They would be so intense. So it was really a good activity for anybody, but especially for the memory impaired. It's that sense of the arts and that we don't lose, and so it's calming and helpful for them. And I've mentioned about looking at books of something that, picture books, that something that connects with your loved one, whether it's whatever the pictures are: flowers, vegetables, buildings, national parks, anything like that. It's always all very important. And another thing that I discovered was helpful to Donald and also to me was pay attention to what you're wearing. An old art educator once told me that there are 4 important things to think about with your outfit you're wearing: color, design, texture, and shine. And if you put those 4 elements together in what you're wearing, it's amazing how, at least for me, how my husband related. If I had on a sweater that had texture, like a boucle sweater or something, he would rub his hands over it. And I have a necklace that has a pendant that's sort of a mottled amethyst, and he would often rub his hands over that. And I'm thinking, what's going on here? And then I realized it was connecting him to some of the materials that he used in his business. The amethyst stone reminded him of concrete. And the boucle sweater just had some texture and nubby to it, again, reminded him of some of the materials that he used in his work. So think about those things when you, I always feel good about myself when I've gotten dressed and not just hanging around in sweatpants and a t-shirt. So take that extra time every day and put your lipstick on, put on your earrings, and dress as if you're going out to get an award. And you'll feel better about yourself, and you'll see how your loved one relates to you. If you're feeling good about yourself and you've got a smile, that's going to resonate with who you're caring for. So I think we've been going for about 3/4 of an hour, and I want to leave time for questions. I'm sure, hope that some of you might have questions that I'll be able to answer. Another video that I bet your library has too. It's called Midsummer's Night Dream. No, Still Dreaming. It's about a couple of young music producers that went to a nursing home in New Jersey, where all the residents were connected with the theater. There were actors and actresses and set designers and musicians, and they decided to put on a Midsummer's Night Dream. And it's hilarious to watch how these people in different stages of Alzheimer's take part in this, putting on this play. So I encourage you to look at that too. I did a 5-week training for something called LINEX here in New Hampshire, which is a learning, senior learning program offered through New England College. And I did a 5-week program on Alzheimer's. And when I showed these 2 videos, Alive Inside and the Midsummer's Night Dreams, people were totally engaged. And when it was all over, I asked for comments and there was dead silence. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is bombed. And then they all piped up and said, oh, wow, this was wonderful. So take advantage of that if that appeals to you. How much do you involve your grown children? I tend to protect them. Well, I don't know how old your grown children are. Mine, my oldest child is 60. So both my sons were actively engaged in what was happening with their father. And my grandchildren, who are now all in their 20s, equally involved in that they didn't see him a whole lot, but when they did, they were great about remembering happy times together and talking to him about that. And I had one grandson one day challenged his grandfather to a race. Let's race up the hall, Grampy, and see who can win. Well, of course, my grandson won, but it was hilarious. And so I think it all depends on the relationship of grandchildren. Younger children, I would explain to them at an age that they can understand what's happening to either a parent or a grandparent. But certainly children from their teens up could know what's happening. I took part in a program at Concord High School one year on a play called Nora's Lost. And it was about a woman who had lost her mind and was physically lost. And this was shown to high school kids. And I was on the panel to talk about what the caregiving aspect. And these kids were eager to know what to do because they had grandparents that had Alzheimer's. So if your children play an instrument, take them with the instrument to visit the sick person or your loved one and let them play some music together, strum the guitar, play whatever, things like that. So I would encourage you, depending on the age, to have them at age appropriate, understand what's going on. I hope that answered the question adequately. My sister is my mother's caregiver. At this point, mother's illness, she cannot handle being alone even for a minute or two. TV does not work anymore. Your sister needs help. I don't know how to help you with that other than to say, maybe it's time to look at hiring professionals to come in or finding a nursing home. Because if you remember what I told you about my husband and the wood stove, you can't be there with your eyes on this person 24/7, and it's tiring and you need sleep. So unless there's more than just you and your sister in the family that can come and spend time with your mother, I don't see any or other friends that will come in and help you any other way other than to have professional help to come and help you, because your sister's going to wear herself out and you're going to wear yourself out too. So maybe through your church, there's a way to find some help, a sort of a reverse kind of caregivers support group. Maybe there are people in your church that will help spell your sister for a few hours a day to give her a break. And by the way, if your church, if you want to form a support group and you don't know where to meet, ask the vestry in your church if you can have a Sunday school room once a week. That's what we did at my church. So did that help the sister who's looking for help for her mother? Because I can't tell. More questions? Okay, I want to show you while somebody's thinking up another question. My books, my trilogy. This is the first book. It's called Melting Ice, Shifting Sand. All this information is available on my website, which is marjorieburke.com. This book is written in both our names. I asked Donald one day what it was like to have Alzheimer's, and he said, I feel like I'm standing on melting ice. I'm unsteady. And I thought, oh my goodness, what a wonderful way to describe it. So I just kept asking him more and more questions and discovered I'm on shifting sand because as unsteady as he was, I was unsteady too. So this first book is about 6 years of the disease of living together and making the most of it. It's not sad, it's funny because he had a wonderful sense of humor. So there are a lot of funny things in this book. The second book is called Pilgrimage on Ice and Sand, and it chronicles 2 years in a nursing home. And again, it's not sad. It is sad, but it's funny because there are all kinds of funny little things in here that happen. And there was one day I was there with him and a friend, and the aide brought him, we were in his room, and the aide brought him a cup of coffee. And as she was leaving, my husband turned to my friend and said, oh, she's my but she's my she's my bartender. So it has a lot of humor in it. The last book in the trilogy is called Beyond Ice and Sand, and it chronicles the last 9 months of his life and a whole year of me figuring out who I am now, that I'm no longer a caregiver and I'm a widow. I depend on my faith a lot, and that's reflected in those 3 books too. And then I wrote a 4th book, which is called When Will Someday Come? And it's basically poems and meditations on caregiving, grieving, and living again. And they're all available from me. I don't use Amazon. So if you're interested, you'll have to go to my website. Any more questions? I'm looking for something here. Of course, I can't find it now. No. Well, I was looking for a quick little poem I could read to you, but I can't seem to find it. Well, this one. Pennies from Heaven, Myth or Reality? I'm never sure, never having found one until tonight, Christmas Eve. Rarely do I use the front door unless I leave the car out like today, because I'm going out to church tonight. As I put the key in the house lock, I look down, and there in the snow lies a shiny penny. He is with me on this special night. I'm grateful. So those are my 4 books. And there's a lot of resources listed in them. There's the website up there. Any more questions? I'm happy to answer them if I can. I wish I could see you all. Well, thank you. Well, even though you've had somebody in the past that's had it, the books are helpful. They'd be good in your church library. I'm not a caregiver, but a therapeutic musician, and the work with Alzheimer's patients is amazing. Yes, indeed. Thank you for affirming that. Art therapy and music therapy wonderful activities for the impaired. When Donald was at Granite Ledges, they had somebody come in once a month with the guitar, and it was just a wonderful, lively time together. Will I be offering additional workshops? I'm available. I would, as long as somebody's willing to organize it. I do a lot of, or before COVID, and I'm beginning to get back into it, I do a lot of speaking on books and on caregiving. So I'd be happy to help anybody doing a workshop on Zoom or in person, if that's possible. For those who are visually impaired, could a list of resources be emailed to today's registrants? Sure. Send a request to my website or to Karen Patterson, who's on here someplace today, and send me your name and address, and I'll mail you out the resources. No problem. So, Karen, I don't know where you are. Oh, I see you up there. I mean, I see the blank spot with your name. If there's interest in any of these people for more workshops, and ECW is willing to facilitate it, I'm available.
Thank you so much, Marjorie. And if they send it to me or John, we'll get it out to them. That's Karen talking.
Yeah.
Now there I am.
There she is. Hi, Karen. Hi. Thank you all very much for joining. I hope it's been helpful for you. I appreciate you giving up an hour or more of your summer Saturday to take part in this. If you're a caregiver, I wish you nothing but the best. I hope that you remember my commandment to you that you take care of yourself first. It's vital. It's not a suggestion, it's a commandment. Just think of Barbara Harris. And just know that as you walk this journey as a caregiver, you're not alone. There are hundreds and thousands of them out there. And if you can find them in your area, go for it. Join up and have friend onion rings instead of fried onion rings, because that's what you need through this journey of friends. And when the end comes, and it will, and you know it's going to happen, and you won't be prepared when it does happen. If you can find in your area, I found through the Visiting Nurses Association, a grievers support group. Take part in that. That'll help you get through. You may not want to do it within a month after your loved one dies, but within 2 or 3 months, if you're ready for it, find a grief support group. It'll help you enormously. So my blessings on each of you. Go in peace. Thank you.